r/AskReddit. What did your partner do that made you suddenly understand they weren't right for you? We were fighting all the time. I'd try to leave, and he'd love bomb me. At some point I just asked him to make some effort, to treat me with some kindness. He replied that he refused to do that, because it would be a lie. I realized that at the most basic level he just didn't like me, but thought of me as a toy he didn't want to lose. On a 19-hour flight booked himself up front in business class, and me in the back with our 4 kids, including the baby on my lap. When I asked him to switch places with me for 2 out of those 19 hours, he told me he couldn't believe how selfish I was being. Ex-husband said I should get pregnant, because it would give me something to do. I was already working 2 jobs. Told me that I wasn't allowed to struggle when they were struggling because it invalidated their feelings. Nearly everyone I've ever dated. If I have stuff going on, you can't have stuff going on because it intrudes on my stuff. Spoiler, they always had stuff going on, and I always played second fiddle to them. Never equal partners. We were walking to a restaurant and casually chatting. I offhand tried to remember what I was up to a couple of days prior. It made sense in the context of the conversation. He cut me off and said probably sleeping in and doing nothing all day. It was just a jab to be hurtful, no lead up to it at all. Not that it should matter, but I had a credit card, car, and the lease on our house all in my name. He had none of those. He worked part-time as a server, but couldn't support himself. I paid all our bills. He didn't want to be on the lease, because he didn't want to feel tied down. He was deeply insecure, and I guess it just came out. He needed to knock me down a peg when he got the chance. I dumped him over dinner at the restaurant. Said he'd gut my pet cats and hang them from the ceiling if I didn't check out of the hospital right now and come home to sort his dinner. Needless to say, when he came home the next day neither me nor the cats were there, but the cops were. It wasn't my partner, but a friend. I was venting about my then boyfriend to a friend I didn't see too often when she stopped me and asked, "Do you even like him as a person? Would you be his friend if you weren't dating?" We broke up shortly after. It was an eye-opening question. He hit me across the face. All the love disappeared then and there. He gleefully told me about how he screamed at some teenage cashier at a restaurant because she accidentally double charged him. He told me it felt good to yell at someone who actually deserved it. He went on about how mean he was to her, how he yelled at her. He was so happy. My jaw was on the floor. I'm the one he screamed at all the time for 5+ years, and he accidentally confessed to knowing that I didn't actually deserve it. I'm not saying that that poor kid did because ducking, yikes. Of course she didn't. That alone might have even been enough if I allowed myself to be honest with myself. But it was the magical phrase "it felt good to yell at someone who actually deserved it" that cured me. Whatever was wrong with my brain that caused me to stay in what I already knew was an abusive relationship. It immediately corrected itself, and I was done. Suddenly I got a tidal wave of eek that was a long time building. I'm so ashamed I stayed with that man for as long as I did. I'm so glad it's over. He was living with me at my parents' house when he fell on tough times. One day he was using my laptop to check emails and left for work. He didn't log out, so when I used my computer I saw he had emails from his new co-worker who was a lesbian. Lol. Nothing crazy, just flirty emails and some selfies. Still staring at his inbox, I called him to confront him about it, and as soon as I started talking about my findings I saw the emails disappearing one by one, probably deleting them from his phone in the moment. Then, denial, denial, denial. That was the last time that boy ever took me for a fool. Lol. Dated a woman for a year. The day she was to start moving in with me, she told me my cat had to go. I told her that wasn't going to happen. She told me I had to choose her or the cat. I told her goodbye. Never saw her again. When he drove my car to another state to duck some girl he met on spring break and took pictures of her riding around in my car. Get the duck out, bro. His mother slapped me so hard she broke my glasses. He just stood there and laughed and said I deserved it. All because I didn't load the bloody dishwasher to her standards. Became abusive after our son was born. especially after going through IVF with donor sperm, because he was sterile. It's a kind of betrayal that I never expected. And my divorce was finalized today, after being separated for a year and a half. Good riddance. One day he was trying the usual gaslighting, but made the mistake of saying something I could absolutely verify wasn't true, so I realized all the times I'd given them the benefit of the doubt and increasingly started to feel like I was wrong to do so. All clicked together like a Jimmy Neutron brain blast and I left. 10 years of on and off abuse finally clicked, and I asked myself, WTF am I doing? So I made a bunch of excuses for leaving and left. Took about 6 months. Now it's been 2 years, and I'm finally free of the love bombs that followed, and proud I stayed strong. I was working 2 jobs to get ahead. I was secretly trying to pay the house off in 7 years. I did. I wanted it to be a surprise. We hit a rough patch, and I found out that she hadn't paid our property taxes in over a year. When I asked, I got vague responses. She decided to get a bunch of cosmetic dentistry done and buy some things and just decided that I should pay it without even telling me she was behind. Just like, duck you, I'm not going to pay anything anymore. We had bills we agreed to pay, etc. Then COVID hit. Over that year, many things I believed to be true were revealed as false or straight up lies. She accepted responsibility for nothing. It became glaringly obvious that I had married and had a child with someone who had completely misrepresented themselves and didn't have the tenacity to keep up the ruse under that long of scrutiny and confinement. COVID. It was so ridiculous one night that I went downstairs to sleep. I never returned. So now I live downstairs, Mill Suite, and we co-parent a teen as I prep to go my separate way. I don't even know who she is anymore. I wish she would have cheated. I would be able to wrap my head around it. Just a manipulative liar. Ducking sad. I feel you. My ex also seemed to change around that time. I'm not sure if it was COVID isolation or not. He started a business in 2021 selling stuff on Amazon, which ended up being more of him getting high and buying a bunch of stuff off Amazon, burning through all the money we had saved and borrowed for it. Then proceeded to secretly borrow twice as much in order to keep the ruse going for another 6 months before spectacularly crashing. I only just got rid of the last of the business stuff that he left when he moved out. I made about $500 on what cost him his marriage, way of life, and 5 figures of debt in my name. It's been nearly 2 years since going bankrupt. He became neglectful and even blamed me for not working hard enough. I paid all the bills except child care, 2 toddlers, including his car, his phone, his insurance, all groceries, and would even pick up child care pretty frequently because he would be out of money. It probably isn't going to surprise anyone, but I also did all the admin work and 80% of the cleaning and parenting. It almost completely ruined me. I got separated and eventually divorced. After espousing the values of family and fatherhood for so many years, he didn't even want to have his kids more than every other weekend. He threatened to take the kids to social services one time if I dropped them off during his custody time because he was sick. He had been sick for 2 weeks at this point and hadn't seen a doctor. Now he's blocked on my contacts and can only contact me by email. That way I don't get immediate notifications. He can get really vicious if something doesn't go his way, and he immediately starts tearing into me. He still never seems to have the money for paying for things like doctors or kids' clothes or groceries. But he also always seems to have a tobacco vape and weed and money to eat out. I also know now that he was gambling a lot. He really thought life would be easier once he didn't have all the responsibilities of family. At the end, I was pretty much just asking him to spend time with us 4 or 5 days a week. I got a second job and roommates and have paid off about 75% of the debt now. He was supposed to pay a certain portion, but he doesn't even pay any child support. So crazy how someone you lived with and had kids with can be so different over time. Some people crumble under even the slightest pressure. It makes me sad to think about all the things they will miss out on. D, who at the time was homeless and jobless and living in his car with his dog, told me, who lived in a nice townhome with roommates, worked full time, and was going to school for my bachelor's, that I really needed to get my life together. He was a manipulative and gaslighting loser who didn't deserve the 6 months he got with me. When I walked outside the pub and saw her making out with a complete stranger, 4 years down the drain, but at least I dodged the bullet of marrying her. Thankfully I've met a much better woman since then. We had been long distance for 5 years and were finally living together because I had decided to move to the city he was living in. Every single day I was grateful to wake up next to him in the morning and go to sleep with him at night without having to say goodbye anymore. He applied for a new job in a city 2.5 hours away from where we lived and only told me about it when he was already about to accept the offer. I tried to be supportive, but I felt so lonely throughout the week when he was gone in a city that wasn't even my home to begin with. That was a 6-year relationship down the drain that I thought was gonna last forever. Cancelled all of our New Year Eve's plans at 5:30 so she could go hang out with her friends so she didn't miss out on anything fun. Got insanely jealous of the attention and support our friends offered when I was awaiting then diagnosed with cancer, to the extent he tried to imply he was going through a similar health scare. He wasn't. The final straw was being so insistent that my chemotherapy treatment is comparable to training for a heavyweight boxing match. He hasn't ever had cancer, chemotherapy, nor ever trained for any boxing match, yet was still arrogantly and angrily insistent he knew better than I what I'm going through. This was in high school. He was a year older than me and about to go into his senior year. I asked what he was planning to do after graduation. He told me he was going to travel with his band. I was surprised, as we'd been friends a while before dating, and I'd never heard about his band. Turns out his plan was to start one and then travel lol. I knew then we had different goals in life. Another guy was just so rude to his sweet mom, it immediately gave me the eek. She was the nicest lady and he was such a little shit to her. We were on a road trip, me, him, and his parents, and we made a stop at a museum. He was in his PJ pants still, so she asked him very nicely to put on jeans. He flipped out. I ended up cutting him off and yelling at him to stop being so disrespectful to his mom and to put on some damn pants lol. Broke up with him when we got back. I had an emotionally abusive wife. I told myself forever she had mental issues and I needed to stay by her side, take the abuse, clear the fog within her, and someday things would be back to normal. Amazingly, despite everything she did to me, what finally showed me her true nature was pretty mundane. At the time, we were both published writers and that things we wrote both got published on obscure unpaid blogs. The only difference was that I wasn't so full of shit that I would call myself a published writer for my contributions to a barely read blog, but she was. She was writing for about 3 months at a very obscure goth blog at this point, me for about 7 years at a slightly more popular, but still largely ignored video game blog. I had also been doing some smaller paid gigs working as a localizer, editor, and writing assistant for some video games. We were at an event and a woman approaches us. It comes up that she is looking for writers and that there's handful of positions open. The job was work from home and paid more than either of us were making at the time. We could both do this job and double our household income easily. The lady asks if we were interested. I was about to excitedly say yes, but my wife decides to cut in and say, well, actually I'm the writer. He doesn't really have any experience. He just writes about video games. Remember at this point that I had been writing for many years longer than she had been. I was infuriated with her. This woke me up. I realized I was the frog and she was the scorpion and she would still sting me as I carry her across the pond, knowing it will kill us both, because this is her nature. She is simply venomous and horrible. She tanked a good salary for us both because she'd rather see me suffer. I didn't leave her immediately after, but it opened my eyes to a possibility I never considered before that would make it easier to leave when the time came. Maybe my wife is irredeemable. Even though he claimed otherwise, his encouragement was manipulation and putting me down. They gave me massive anxiety and second guess myself constantly. I ended the relationship in December and I'm working on bettering myself. First, with a new job, getting out of retail, and now I'm gonna start working at a hospital in April. I just found out my brother died of an OD on a rooftop. His friend took the needle and left him there to die alone. My brother was schizophrenic and got kicked out when he stopped taking his meds due to his hallucinations. He picked up drugs on the streets. My ex told me I was selfish for grieving because he was fresh out of the hospital. My brother died alone of an OD because no one cared. Got into a confrontation with a person who was using the dryer in their laundry room for longer than one cycle. He took their clothes out of the dryer and put his into it because it was not their turn and said he'd fight them if they disagreed. Total freak. Ditched him as soon as possible. I had to beg him to lift his headset so I could tell him I was in the process of having a miscarriage, and he smiled and said okay, cool. Put them back on, continued go play his game while I went back to the fetal position in the bathroom next to our 1-year-old's room so I could tend to the baby throughout the night. My dumb unhealed ass stayed for 3 more years too. She's recently admitted and told me to my face she's not as interested in me as when we first met. Didn't really seem to think that throwaway comment might have bothered me. Couple that with the fact she's on Discord legitimately for all hours of the day with her mates, and I do mean all hours. I'm not getting jealous or anxious of her spending time with her mates. Of course she can lol at merely the fact that I, as her partner / best friend, don't seem to get the same time and energy they do, and doesn't seem to want to spend any time with me anymore, except when we settle down into bed at the end of the day before we nod off, and it's really starting to feel as if I don't really matter to her anymore. If you'd asked a couple of years ago, I would have told you she's the one. Now I'm not so sure. Really feels like she's over me, and it hurts like hell to write this out. I just want to matter. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.